The old woman shuffled through the rain-soaked streets of downtown Seattle, her weathered hands clutching a plastic grocery bag filled with day-old bread and bruised apples. Passersby quickened their pace, avoiding eye contact with the homeless woman whose gray hair hung in tangled strands around her face. Her clothes were layers of mismatched fabric, torn at the seams and stained with years of hard living. Most people saw her as just another casualty of the city's growing homeless crisis, another forgotten soul lost to addiction or mental illness. But beneath the grime and desperation, behind those hollow eyes that had seen too much, lay a secret that would shake the foundations of international intelligence agencies across 3 continents. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The woman they called Claire had been haunting the same 6-block radius of Pioneer Square for nearly 3 years now. She slept in doorways, rummaged through dumpsters behind restaurants, and spent her days sitting on the same park bench feeding pigeons with stale crumbs. The local police knew her well enough to call her by name when they moved her along from private property. Social workers had tried countless times to get her into shelters or treatment programs, but she always disappeared before morning, vanishing into the maze of alleyways and abandoned buildings that made up Seattle's underground. What made Claire different from the dozens of other homeless individuals in the area wasn't immediately obvious. She kept to herself, rarely spoke to anyone, and seemed to drift through life like a ghost among the living. But Dr. Sarah Chen, who ran a mobile medical clinic for the homeless, had been watching Claire for months with growing curiosity. There was something about the way the woman moved that didn't quite fit the profile of someone broken by life on the streets. Despite her disheveled appearance and apparent fragility, Claire walked with purpose. Her posture, even when hunched over a shopping cart full of recyclables, suggested someone who had once carried herself with military precision. When startled by sudden noises, her reactions were too quick, too controlled. Most telling of all were her eyes during their brief medical encounters. While Claire played the part of a confused adult vagrant, Dr. Chen caught glimpses of sharp intelligence lurking behind the facade, a calculating awareness that seemed to catalog every person and exit in any room she entered. The breakthrough came on a particularly cold November evening when Claire collapsed outside the Union Gospel Mission. An ambulance rushed her to Harborview Medical Center, where emergency room staff assumed they were dealing with another case of hypothermia and malnutrition. The attending physician, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, had seen hundreds of similar cases over his 15-year career, treating Seattle's homeless population. What he hadn't expected was the extensive network of surgical scars hidden beneath layers of dirty clothing, or the small tattoo on Claire's left shoulder blade that would soon turn her world upside down. The tattoo was barely visible, faded with age and partially obscured by scar tissue from what appeared to be a bullet wound. Most medical staff would have dismissed it as typical body art from a misspent youth, but Dr. Rodriguez had served 2 tours as a Navy medic in Afghanistan before completing his residency. He recognized military iconography when he saw it, and this particular design made his blood run cold. The image was subtle but unmistakable to anyone with the right clearance level, a stylized phoenix rising from flames with wings that formed the number 7, accompanied by a series of small stars arranged in a pattern that held significance only to those who had operated in the deepest shadows of international intelligence. Dr. Rodriguez had seen that exact symbol only once before, in a classified briefing during his military service. It belonged to Phantom 7, an elite operative unit that had been disbanded after a catastrophic mission failure in Eastern Europe 10 years earlier. According to official records, all members of Phantom 7 had been killed in action during a Black Ops mission that went wrong. The unit's very existence had been scrubbed from most databases, their identities sealed under national security protocols, that carried life sentences for unauthorized disclosure. The next morning, Dr. Rodriguez made a decision that would change everything. Instead of following standard protocol for treating homeless patients, he quietly contacted his former commanding officer, Colonel James Patterson, who now worked in a classified capacity for the Department of Defense. The conversation was brief and cryptic, consisting mostly of coded phrases and careful euphemisms, but the message was clear. Someone who should have been dead for a decade was lying in a hospital bed in Seattle, and her tattoo suggested she might be the key to answering questions that had haunted intelligence agencies for years. Claire regained consciousness 3 days later to find herself in a private room with a view of Elliott Bay. The first thing she noticed was that her usual clothes had been replaced with a hospital gown, and someone had cleaned the grime from her fingernails. The second thing she noticed was the man sitting in the chair beside her bed, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and watching her with the careful attention of someone who recognized exactly what he was looking at. Agent Daniel Morrison had been with the CIA for 23 years, specializing in cases that officially didn't exist. He had spent the last decade investigating the mysterious circumstances surrounding the Phantom 7 mission, trying to piece together what had really happened during those 48 hours in Prague when 6 of America's most elite operatives had simply vanished. The official story was that they had all died in an explosion while attempting to extract a high-value target from a heavily fortified compound. The unofficial story was that someone had betrayed them, and the resulting cover-up had buried the truth so deep that even he had begun to doubt whether the real answers would ever surface. Claire opened her eyes and looked directly at Agent Morrison without showing any sign of surprise or confusion. For someone who had supposedly been living on the streets for years, battling addiction and mental illness, her gaze was remarkably steady and calculating. She studied his face for several seconds before speaking, and when she did, her voice carried none of the slurred speech or disorientation that her medical record suggested. "How long have you been looking for me?" she asked, her words clear and measured. Agent Morrison leaned forward slightly, his pulse quickening with the realization that his suspicions were correct. 10 years, 2 months, and 16 days, he replied. "Though for most of that time, we thought we were looking for a body." Claire's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of recognition that confirmed everything he had hoped and feared. "Agent Morrison," she said, using his name though they had never been introduced. "I assume you have questions." The formal debriefing took place in a secure facility 30 miles outside Seattle, in a building that didn't appear on any public maps. Claire had been transported there under medical supervision, officially still a patient recovering from exposure and malnutrition. But the woman who sat across from Agent Morrison in the soundproof interrogation room bore little resemblance to the homeless vagrant who had collapsed outside the mission. Her posture was straight, her movements precise, and her eyes held the focused intensity of someone who had spent years training to kill. Dr. Rodriguez had been granted temporary security clearance to attend the session, both as Claire's attending physician and as the person who had recognized the significance of her tattoo. Colonel Patterson participated via secure video link from an undisclosed location, his face grim as he prepared to hear testimony that might finally explain one of the intelligence community's most troubling unsolved cases. Claire began her story with a simple statement that reframed everything they thought they knew about the Phantom 7 mission. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "I was the 7th member of Phantom 7, the one who wasn't supposed to exist in any official records. My cover identity was so deep that even my own team didn't know my real name or background." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. According to every classified file, every mission briefing, every after-action report, Phantom 7 had consisted of 6 operatives. The existence of a seventh member would mean that everything they thought they knew about the mission was wrong, that the cover-up had been even more extensive than anyone had imagined. Elena continued, her words carefully chosen and delivered with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times. The mission parameters were different than what was recorded in the official files. We weren't extracting the high-value target from Prague. We were investigating reports that someone within our own agency was selling classified information to foreign intelligence services. The target was one of our own. Colonel Patterson's face appeared on the monitor, his expression grave. Are you saying that Phantom 7 was investigating suspected treason within the CIA? Not suspected, Elena replied. Confirmed. We had documented evidence of systematic intelligence leaks that had compromised at least 12 active operations over the previous 18 months. The Prague mission was supposed to be a trap designed to expose the mole and gather evidence for prosecution. Agent Morrison felt a chill run down his spine as pieces of a puzzle he had been working on for years suddenly began to fall into place. What went wrong? Elena's composure cracked slightly, and for the first time since revealing her identity, she showed emotion. The mole knew we were coming. Our entire operation had been compromised from the beginning. What we thought was a trap for them turned out to be a trap for us. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The explosion that had officially killed all 6 members of Phantom 7 had been no accident. According to Elena's testimony, it had been a precisely orchestrated assassination designed to eliminate the only people who could expose the traitor. Within the CIA, the blast had been triggered remotely at the exact moment when the team was preparing to extract their evidence, ensuring that both the operatives and the proof of treason would be destroyed simultaneously. Elena had survived only because she had been positioned outside the building as a lookout, far enough away to avoid the initial explosion, but close enough to witness the systematic execution of her wounded teammates by enemy operatives who arrived within minutes of the blast. She had watched from her concealed position as each member of Phantom 7 was shot execution style. Their bodies then moved back into the burning building to support the official story of an operational accident. I had 2 choices, Elena explained, her voice hollow with the weight of memory. I could try to fight my way out and risk being captured, tortured, and killed like the others. Or I could disappear completely, let everyone believe I had died in the explosion, and use the time to gather evidence that would eventually expose the truth. She had chosen the latter option, using skills learned during years of deep cover operations to create a new identity and vanish into the underground networks that existed in every major city. The homeless woman named Claire had been the perfect cover, invisible to the very agencies that were still hunting for Alana Vasquez. For 10 years, she had lived on the streets while secretly conducting her own investigation, following money trails and communication patterns that led back to the highest levels of the intelligence community. Dr. Rodriguez found himself struggling to process the magnitude of what he was hearing. But why reveal yourself now? What changed? Elena reached into the pocket of her hospital gown and withdrew a small memory device, no larger than a thumbnail. Because I finally found him, she said, placing the device on the table between them. The mole who betrayed Phantom 7 and caused the deaths of 6 of the best operatives this country has ever produced. The memory device contained 10 years' worth of carefully gathered intelligence, financial records, communication intercepts, and photographic evidence that painted a devastating picture of corruption at the highest levels of the CIA. The traitor wasn't just any agency employee, but someone who had held positions of significant authority during the time of the Phantom 7 mission and had used that access to orchestrate the team's destruction. Agent Morrison stared at the device, knowing that its contents would likely expose a conspiracy that reached far beyond a single rogue operative. Who is it? Elena's eyes hardened with the cold fury of someone who had spent a decade planning. Revenge, Deputy Director Marcus Webb, she said, naming one of the most respected figures in the intelligence community. The man who personally briefed Phantom 7 on their final mission. The man who selected the targets, approved the operational parameters, and signed off on the mission timeline. The man who knew exactly when and where to tell his foreign contacts to position their assassination team. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Deputy Director Webb was a 30-year veteran of the CIA, a man whose service record was decorated with commendations for distinguished service and whose reputation for integrity was legendary within the agency. He had personally overseen the investigation into the Phantom 7 mission failure, had attended memorial services for the fallen operatives, and had been instrumental in establishing new protocols designed to prevent similar tragedies. Colonel Patterson's voice came through the speakers, tight with controlled rage. What evidence do you have? Elena began outlining the case she had built over the previous decade, explaining how she had tracked Webb's financial activities, monitored his communications, and documented his meetings with known foreign intelligence operatives. The evidence was overwhelming and methodical, the work of someone who had devoted every waking moment to building an airtight case against the man who had destroyed her life and killed her team. The Swiss bank accounts, the encrypted communications, the pattern of operational failures that coincided with Webb's access to classified information. All of it pointed to a level of treachery that went far beyond simple financial motivation. Webb hadn't just been selling secrets for money. He had been systematically undermining American intelligence operations for over 15 years, and the Phantom 7 mission had been his most audacious act of betrayal. Agent Morrison found himself faced with a choice that would define the rest of his career. He could follow protocol, turn Elena over to his superiors, and let the agency handle the situation through official channels. Or he could trust the word of a woman who had been officially dead for 10 years and whose story, if true, would expose corruption that reached the highest levels of the intelligence community. Dr. Rodriguez watched the exchange with growing unease, realizing that he had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple case of mistaken identity. The woman he had known as Claire was not just a former spy, but a walking threat to some of the most powerful people in the government. Her very existence was proof that the official story of the Phantom 7 mission was a lie, and the evidence she carried could destroy careers and potentially trigger a complete reorganization of the CIA. Elena seemed to sense the direction of his thoughts. Dr. Rodriguez, she said, turning to face him directly, I need you to understand something important. The moment you recognized that tattoo and contacted your former commanding officer, you became part of this conspiracy. Deputy Director Webb has spent 10 years believing that all witnesses to his betrayal were dead. Learning that one of us survived will make him extremely dangerous. The implications were chilling. If Webb was indeed the traitor that Elena claimed, then her revelation would put not just her own life at risk, but the lives of everyone who had become involved in exposing him. The deputy director had the resources and authority to make problems disappear, and a homeless woman who had been living off the grid for a decade would be an easy target. Agent Morrison made his decision. We're going to need to move you to a secure location immediately, he told Elena. If Webb is monitoring agency communications, he may already know that you've surfaced. Elena shook her head. Moving me won't solve the problem. Webb has been planning for this possibility for 10 years. He'll have contingencies in place, protocols for dealing with any surviving members of Phantom 7 who might surface. The only way to stop him is to make the evidence public before he can act. Colonel Patterson's voice crackled through the speakers with urgent authority. That's not how this works, Commander. We follow chain of command. We present the evidence to the appropriate authorities and let them determine the best course of action. The appropriate authorities include Deputy Director Webb, Elena replied coldly. The man who has been covering up his own crimes for a decade. Presenting evidence to him would be the same as signing our death warrants. The debate that followed revealed the fundamental problem with exposing corruption within the intelligence community. Every official channel for reporting suspected misconduct ultimately led back to the very people who might be involved in the conspiracy. Webb's position gave him access to ongoing investigations, the ability to redirect resources, and the authority to classify or declassify information as needed to protect himself. Elena had anticipated this problem during her years of preparation. I've spent 10 years documenting not just Webb's crimes, but the network of people who have helped him cover them up. The evidence on that memory device doesn't just implicate one man. It exposes a systematic pattern of corruption that involves at least a dozen high-ranking officials across multiple agencies. Dr. Rodriguez felt increasingly out of his depth as the conversation turned to discussions of classified operations, foreign intelligence services, and government conspiracies. His medical training had prepared him to deal with trauma and crisis, but nothing had prepared him for the possibility that his simple act of recognizing the tattoo would expose him to this level of danger. "What do you need from us?" Agent Morrison asked, his voice resigned to the reality that they were already too deeply involved to back out safely. Elena's response was swift and decisive. "I need 48 hours to contact certain journalists and former intelligence officials who have been investigating similar cases. People who are outside the normal chain of command and who have the resources to make this information public simultaneously across multiple platforms." The plan she outlined was audacious in its scope. Rather than trying to work within the system that had been corrupted, Elena proposed bypassing it entirely. The evidence would be released to investigative journalists, congressional oversight committees, and international intelligence services simultaneously, creating a media firestorm that would be impossible to contain or suppress. Colonel Patterson expressed the concern that was on everyone's mind. "If you're wrong about Webb, if there's another explanation for the evidence you've gathered, then you'll be destroying the career of one of the most respected figures in the intelligence community." Elena's response was immediate and unwavering. "I watched Marcus Webb personally select the timing and location for the Phantom 7 mission. I heard him briefing us on operational parameters that were specifically designed to put us in a vulnerable position. I saw the results of his betrayal when my teammates were executed one by one in that burning building." The raw emotion in her voice carried the weight of 10 years of survival, planning, and preparation. This wasn't the testimony of someone driven by paranoia or revenge fantasy. This was the carefully documented case of a professional intelligence operative who had dedicated her life to exposing the truth about her team's betrayal. Agent Morrison looked at the memory device on the table, knowing that its contents would change everything. "How do we know that Webb doesn't already know you've surfaced? How do we know this entire conversation isn't being monitored?" Elena's smile was cold and calculating. "Because I've spent the last 3 years monitoring his communications and activities. Deputy Director Webb is currently attending a classified briefing at Langley, discussing budget allocations for the next fiscal year. His phone records show that he hasn't made any unusual calls in the past 72 hours, and his financial accounts show no signs of the kind of activity that would indicate he's preparing to disappear." The level of surveillance she had maintained while living as a homeless woman was staggering. Elena had somehow managed to keep tabs on one of the most powerful figures in the intelligence community while maintaining her cover as a mentally ill vagrant who slept in doorways and collected aluminum cans for recycling. Dr. Rodriguez found his voice. "How is any of this possible? How did you manage to conduct this kind of investigation while living on the streets?" Elena's expression softened slightly, the first sign of humanity she had shown since revealing her identity. Because being invisible has advantages that most people don't understand. Homeless people see everything and are noticed by no one. We're present at every level of society, from corporate boardrooms to government offices, cleaning floors and emptying trash cans and listening to conversations that powerful people assume no one important is hearing. The network she described was vast and informal, a loose confederation of people who had been discarded by society, but who retained their intelligence, skills, and connections. Former military personnel, discharged intelligence operatives, and other professionals who had fallen through the cracks of the system formed an underground information network that was invisible to official surveillance. Some of the most valuable intelligence I've gathered came from homeless veterans who work as janitors in government buildings, Elena continued. People who have security clearances from their military service, but who are treated as invisible by the officials whose offices they clean. They overhear conversations, see documents that are left on desks, and notice patterns that trained investigators miss. Agent Morrison realized that Elena's decade of homelessness hadn't been just about survival and investigation. It had been about building a network of assets that existed completely outside the normal intelligence community. People who could gather information without being detected or suspected. The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Patterson's voice, urgent and concerned. "We've got a problem. I'm showing unusual activity on the secure communications channels. Someone is making inquiries about medical admissions to Seattle area hospitals, specifically focusing on homeless individuals who were brought in during the past week." Elena's demeanor changed instantly, her body tensing with the alert focus of someone who had spent years expecting this moment. "How much time do we have?" "Unknown," Patterson replied. "But if someone is specifically looking for homeless admissions, then they may already know you've surfaced." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Elena had been so careful, so thorough in maintaining her cover, but the simple act of collapsing outside the Union Gospel mission had potentially exposed her to the very people she had been hiding from for 10 years. Dr. Rodriguez felt a chill of fear as he realized that his decision to contact his former commanding officer might have triggered a chain of events that would put all of their lives at risk. What do we do now? Elena stood up, moving with the fluid grace of someone whose body remembered years of combat training, despite a decade of deliberate neglect. Now we accelerate the timeline. I need to make contact with my media sources immediately. If Webb knows I'm alive, then we have hours, not days, before he moves to eliminate the threat. Agent Morrison was already reaching for his secure phone when Elena stopped him with a gesture. "No agency communications," she said firmly. "We have to assume that anything transmitted through official channels will be intercepted. From this point forward, we're operating outside the system." The plan that emerged over the next hour was desperate, but carefully thought out. Elena would use her network of contacts to simultaneously release the evidence to multiple media outlets and congressional sources, creating a flood of information that would be impossible to suppress. Agent Morrison would provide official corroboration where possible, while Colonel Patterson would work to protect them from agency retaliation. Dr. Rodriguez would return to his normal duties at the hospital, maintaining the fiction that Elena was still under medical supervision while actually providing cover for her activities. It was a dangerous role for someone with no intelligence training, but his medical credentials and legitimate reason for being involved made him a valuable asset. Elena's transformation from homeless vagrant to intelligence operative was complete. As she began making preparations for what she knew would be the most dangerous phase of her 10-year mission, the evidence she had gathered would either expose one of the most significant betrayals in intelligence history or get them all killed in the attempt. As the meeting broke up and the participants prepared to implement their desperate plan, Dr. Rodriguez found himself wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. The woman he had known as Claire was gone, replaced by someone whose very existence threatened to unravel conspiracies that reached the highest levels of government. The simple act of recognizing the tattoo had drawn him into a world where the stakes were measured in lives rather than careers, and where the truth was worth dying for. Elena paused at the door, looking back at the three men who had chosen to trust her story and risk everything to help her expose it. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command authority that had been dormant for 10 years. "In 48 hours, either Deputy Director Marcus Webb will be under arrest for treason, or we'll all be dead. I hope you understand what you've committed to." The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo with finality. Dr. Rodriguez stared at the empty chair where she had been sitting, trying to process the magnitude of what he had set in motion by recognizing a faded tattoo on the shoulder of a homeless woman. The Claire he had known was gone, revealed as an elaborate cover identity for someone who had been officially dead for 10 years. Agent Morrison was already working his secure phone, making carefully coded calls to contacts he trusted implicitly. Colonel Patterson's image on the monitor showed the grim determination of someone who had seen too many good people die for causes that were later revealed to be lies. Elena Vasquez, the 7th member of Phantom 7, was no longer dead. And her resurrection was about to expose truths that powerful people had killed to keep hidden. The next 48 hours would determine whether justice would finally be served, or whether the conspiracy that had already claimed 6 lives would claim several more. The woman who had been invisible for 10 years was about to become the most visible person in the intelligence community, and the tattoo that had revealed her identity was about to reveal secrets that would shake the foundations of American intelligence. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Seattle's industrial district had been Elena's primary safe house for the past 18 months. Hidden beneath layers of rust and decay, the building contained sophisticated communication equipment, detailed surveillance maps of government facilities, and thousands of pages of carefully documented evidence that she had gathered during her decade-long investigation. As she made her way through the maze of shipping containers and broken machinery that concealed the entrance, Elena felt the familiar weight of returning to her true identity after years of playing the role of a broken woman. The transformation began with a shower that washed away not just the grime of street living, but the psychological burden of maintaining a cover identity that had become second nature. Clean clothes emerged from a hidden compartment, tactical gear that had been carefully maintained despite years of storage. The homeless woman named Claire ceased to exist as Elena Vasquez reclaimed the skills and mindset that had once made her one of the most effective intelligence operatives in the world. Her first priority was establishing contact with the network of sources she had cultivated over the past decade. These weren't official intelligence assets or registered informants, but a carefully selected group of journalists, former government officials, and international contacts who had been investigating similar cases of corruption within intelligence agencies. Each had been approached gradually, over years of careful relationship building, without ever revealing her true identity or the full scope of what she had uncovered. The lead contact was investigative journalist Marcus Thompson, whose series of articles exposing Pentagon contractor fraud had won him a Pulitzer Prize and made him one of the most feared reporters in Washington. Elena had been feeding him carefully selected pieces of information for 3 years, always through intermediaries, building his interest in the broader pattern of intelligence community corruption without revealing the central conspiracy involving Deputy Director Webb. Thompson's secure phone number connected on the second ring, his voice immediately alert despite the early hour. Elena's call was brief and coded, using phrases they had established years earlier to indicate the highest level of urgency. Within 30 minutes, Thompson was on a plane from Washington to Seattle, carrying encryption equipment and secure communication devices that would allow them to coordinate the simultaneous release of information across multiple platforms. Second contact was Dr. Elizabeth Park, a former NSA analyst who had been forced out of the agency after raising concerns about domestic surveillance overreach. Park now worked as a cybersecurity consultant for congressional oversight committees, providing technical expertise for investigations into intelligence community activities. She had been asking the right questions about the Phantom 7 mission for years, following financial irregularities and communication patterns that suggested the official story was incomplete. Dr. Park's response to Elena's coded message was immediate and decisive. She understood the implications of what Elena was revealing and recognized that they would have only one opportunity to present the evidence before powerful forces moved to suppress it. Her connections within the Congressional Intelligence Committees would provide official channels for presenting the information, while her technical expertise would ensure that the electronic evidence could be authenticated and verified. The third member of Elena's network was perhaps the most dangerous to contact. Colonel Sarah Mitchell had been Webb's deputy during the time of the Phantom 7 mission and had spent years questioning inconsistencies in the official after-action reports. Mitchell's position within the intelligence community made her both a valuable ally and a potential security risk, but Elena had been monitoring her activities long enough to be confident in her integrity. Mitchell's reaction to learning that a member of Phantom 7 had survived was immediate and emotional. She had attended memorial services for the fallen operatives, had spoken with their families, and had carried the burden of believing that her questions about the mission parameters had been unfounded paranoia. The revelation that her suspicions had been correct, that 6 of America's best operatives had been murdered by their own deputy director, transformed her from a cautious ally into a fierce advocate for justice. While Elena worked to coordinate her media strategy, Agent Morrison was conducting his own investigation into the inquiries that Colonel Patterson had detected. The pattern of communications was disturbing and suggested that someone with significant authority was specifically looking for Elena. Hospital admissions records were being reviewed, medical personnel were being questioned, and surveillance teams were being positioned around facilities that had treated homeless individuals during the past week. The source of these inquiries was traced back to a special task force within the CIA that operated under Deputy Director Webb's direct authority. The unit was officially tasked with investigating potential security breaches and conducting damage assessment for compromised operations. Unofficially, it served as Webb's personal enforcement arm, handling situations that required discretion and plausible deniability. Dr. Rodriguez found himself struggling to maintain normal hospital routines, while knowing that Elena's empty room was being monitored by people who would kill to keep their secrets hidden. The medical records showed that she was still under observation for complications related to exposure and malnutrition, but any attempt to visit her would reveal that she was no longer in the building. The deception could only be maintained for a few more hours before someone would demand to see the patient. The first sign that Webb was accelerating his response came when Agent Morrison received an urgent summons to report to CIA headquarters for an unscheduled briefing. The message was couched in routine language about operational updates and budget discussions, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Webb was gathering potential threats into a controlled environment where they could be monitored and eliminated if necessary. Elena's reaction to this development was swift and decisive. Morrison would attend the meeting as scheduled, carrying a concealed recording device and following a predetermined script designed to determine how much Webb knew about her survival. The risk was enormous, but the intelligence gained would be crucial for timing the release of evidence. The meeting at Langley took place in Webb's private conference room, a soundproof space decorated with commendations and photographs from 3 decades of distinguished service. Webb himself was an imposing figure, tall and silver-haired with the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. His reputation for integrity and competence was legendary within the agency, making Elena's accusations seem almost absurd. To anyone who hadn't seen the evidence, Webb's opening comments focused on routine administrative matters, budget allocations for overseas operations, and personnel assignments for upcoming missions. But Morrison noticed subtle changes in the deputy director's demeanor, a carefully controlled tension that suggested he was operating under significant stress. The conversation gradually shifted toward more sensitive topics, including recent security concerns and potential threats to ongoing operations. The critical moment came when Webb mentioned the tragic loss of Phantom 7, expressing regret that the circumstances of their deaths had never been fully explained. His words were perfectly calibrated, showing appropriate emotion while subtly reinforcing the official narrative about operational accidents and mission parameters. But Morrison caught something else in Webb's voice, a satisfaction that was quickly concealed but unmistakable to someone who knew what to listen for. Morrison's response was carefully crafted to gauge Webb's reaction. He mentioned recent rumors about surviving members of disbanded units, hypothetical scenarios about what would happen if someone had escaped the official records. Webb's reply was immediate and chilling in its implications. Any surviving members of Phantom 7 would represent a significant security risk, he explained, possessing classified information that could compromise ongoing operations if it fell into the wrong hands. The subtext was clear. Webb was not only aware that Elena might have survived, but was actively planning to eliminate her as a threat to his continued freedom. The meeting concluded with Webb assigning Morrison to a special task force investigating potential security breaches, effectively placing him under direct surveillance while maintaining the pretense of normal operations. Elena received Morrison's coded report within an hour of his departure from Langley. Webb's behavior confirmed her worst fears about the timeline they were facing. The deputy director was moving to consolidate his position and eliminate threats, which meant they had hours rather than days before he would act decisively to protect himself. The acceleration of events forced Elena to implement the most dangerous phase of her plan ahead of schedule. Rather than waiting for careful coordination with all her media contacts, she would have to trust that the evidence was compelling enough to speak for itself. The memory device containing 10 years of investigation would be uploaded simultaneously to secure servers controlled by Thompson, Dr. Park, and 3 international intelligence services that had been investigating similar corruption cases. Thompson's arrival in Seattle coincided with Elena's final preparations for what she knew would be the most dangerous night of her life. The journalist's initial shock at learning her true identity quickly gave way to professional excitement. As he realized the magnitude of the story she was offering, the evidence on Elena's memory device didn't just expose Webb's betrayal of Phantom 7, but revealed a pattern of corruption that extended far beyond a single operation. The financial records showed systematic payments from foreign intelligence services dating back 15 years, totaling millions of dollars in exchange for classified information about American operations. The communication intercepts revealed a network of contacts within hostile governments who had been receiving real-time intelligence about ongoing missions. Most damning of all were the operational records showing how Webb had deliberately sabotaged missions, caused the deaths of American operatives, and covered up his crimes through his position of authority. Dr. Park's technical analysis of the electronic evidence confirmed its authenticity and revealed additional layers of the conspiracy. Webb had not been working alone, but had cultivated a network of accomplices within the CIA, NSS, and other agencies who had helped him maintain his cover while systematically betraying American interests. The scope of the treachery was staggering, involving dozens of compromised operations and the deaths of at least 30 American operatives over the past decade and a half. Colonel Mitchell's review of the operational aspects of the case provided military context that made Webb's betrayal even more shocking. The missions that had been compromised included some of the most sensitive operations in recent American history, involving extraction of high-value targets, disruption of terrorist networks, and protection of critical intelligence assets. Webb's betrayal had not just cost American lives, but had damaged national security in ways that would take years to fully understand. As Elena's team worked through the night to prepare their coordinated release of information, Webb was implementing his own final solution to the problem she represented. The special task force under his command had identified her location through a combination of surveillance and analysis of communication patterns. Teams were being positioned around the warehouse district, equipped with authority to use lethal force in response to any resistance. Elena's awareness of these movements came through her network of street contacts, homeless individuals and forgotten veterans who noticed the systematic positioning of vehicles and personnel around the industrial area. The surveillance teams were professional and well-equipped, but they had underestimated the value of human intelligence networks that existed completely outside official channels. The final hours before dawn became a deadly game of cat and mouse, as Elena worked to complete her mission while avoiding the kill teams that were systematically searching every building in the area. Her years of living on the streets had taught her every hidden passage, every abandoned tunnel, every concealed route through the maze of industrial infrastructure that made up Seattle's waterfront district. Thompson and Dr. Park had established their secure upload points in separate locations across the city, ready to simultaneously release the evidence to news organizations, congressional committees, and international partners at Elena's signal. The coordination required split-second timing, as any delay would give Webb the opportunity to use his authority to suppress the information before it could reach the public. Colonel Mitchell was facing her own dangerous moment as she prepared to present the evidence to selected members of the Congressional Intelligence Committee. Her position within the military chain of command made her vulnerable to retaliation, but her credibility and access to classified systems would provide official validation for Elena's accusations. The risk was enormous, as a wrong move could result in charges of treason and the destruction of her career. Elena's final message to her team was brief and decisive. At exactly 06:00 hours Eastern Time, as Webb was arriving at his office for what he assumed would be a normal day of managing the crisis of her survival, the evidence would be released simultaneously across multiple platforms. News organizations would have the story, congressional committees would have the official files, and international partners would have confirmation of the intelligence breaches they had long suspected. The timing was crucial because it would coincide with the morning news cycle on the East Coast, ensuring maximum public exposure before Webb could use his authority to classify the information or launch damage control efforts. Elena knew that once the story broke publicly, she would become the most hunted person in America, but she would also become too visible to eliminate quietly. As dawn approached over Seattle, Elena made her way through the final series of tunnels and passages that would bring her to the predetermined extraction point where Agent Morrison was waiting with transportation to a secure location. Behind her, the kill teams were systematically searching the warehouse where she had spent the night, finding sophisticated communication equipment and evidence of long-term surveillance activities, but no sign of their target. The upload process began at exactly 0559 hours, as Thompson's secure servers started transmitting terabytes of classified documents to news organizations across 3 continents. Dr. Park's congressional contacts received authenticated copies of the financial records and communication intercepts that proved Webb's systematic betrayal of American operations. Colonel Mitchell stood before a closed session of the Senate Intelligence Committee, presenting evidence that would fundamentally change how they viewed the intelligence community's internal security. Webb's first indication that his carefully constructed world was collapsing came when his secure phone began receiving urgent calls from contacts at the Washington Post, the New York Times, and CNN, all asking for comment on explosive allegations about the Phantom 7 mission and systematic intelligence leaks. His initial reaction was controlled panic. followed by desperate attempts to use his authority to suppress the story before it could gain momentum. But Elena's plan had anticipated these exact responses. The evidence had been released simultaneously to so many sources that no single authority could suppress all of them. International intelligence services were already confirming aspects of the story that corroborated their own investigations into American intelligence leaks. Congressional committees were demanding immediate hearings and investigations that Webb could not block or delay. Elena reached the extraction point just as the first news alerts were beginning to appear on mobile devices across the country. Agent Morrison's expression was grim, but determined as he helped her into the secure vehicle that would transport her to a location where she could provide official testimony about Webb's crimes. After 10 years of being officially dead, Elena Vasquez was about to become the most important witness in one of the largest intelligence scandals in American history. The drive through Seattle's morning traffic was surreal as radio news broadcasts began reporting on breaking stories about CIA corruption and the resurrection of a supposedly dead operative. Elena listened to the reports with satisfaction, knowing that each media outlet that picked up the story made it harder for Webb to suppress the truth or eliminate the people who had exposed it. Dr. Rodriguez received a coded message confirming that Elena had reached safety, allowing him to finally reveal to hospital administrators that his patient had been transferred to a federal facility for reasons of national security. His role in the conspiracy was officially over, but he knew that his recognition of a faded tattoo had been the catalyst for exposing one of the most significant betrayals in intelligence history. Webb's final hours of freedom were spent in increasingly desperate attempts to salvage his position and eliminate the threats to his continued liberty. His authority was evaporating as news of the scandal spread and congressional leaders demanded his immediate suspension pending investigation. The kill teams that had been searching for Elena were recalled as their operations became too visible to maintain plausible deniability. By noon Eastern Time, less than 6 hours after Elena's evidence had been released, Deputy Director Marcus Webb was under arrest for treason, espionage, and the murder of 6 American intelligence operatives. The conspiracy that had cost so many lives and compromised so many operations was finally exposed, brought down by a woman who had spent 10 years living as a ghost to gather the evidence needed for justice. Elena's testimony before congressional committees and federal investigators would continue for months. As the full scope of Webb's betrayal became clear and other members of his network were identified and prosecuted, the Phantom 7 mission was officially reopened and reclassified, with Elena's 6 fallen teammates finally receiving the recognition and honors they had been denied by the cover-up of their murders. The homeless woman named Claire had disappeared forever, replaced by Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, whose survival and determination had finally brought justice for one of the most shocking betrayals in American intelligence history. Her tattoo, the small phoenix rising from flames that Dr. Rodriguez had recognized in a Seattle emergency room, had become the symbol of how truth could survive even the most determined efforts to bury it. The warehouse district where Elena had hidden for years became the subject of federal investigation, as authorities worked to understand how she had managed to conduct such an extensive intelligence operation while living completely off the grid. The network of homeless veterans and forgotten citizens who had helped her gather information were recognized as an unofficial intelligence asset that had proven more effective than many official operations. Webb's arrest sent shockwaves through the intelligence community as investigators worked to identify other members of his network and assess the damage caused by 15 years of systematic betrayal. The financial records Elena had gathered led to the discovery of additional accounts and the arrest of foreign intelligence operatives who had been receiving classified American information. Elena's story became a reminder that sometimes the most important truths are carried by the most overlooked people. and that justice can survive even when it seems completely buried by corruption and conspiracy. The woman who had been officially dead for 10 years had brought down one of the most powerful figures in American intelligence, proving that some secrets are too important to stay hidden forever. The federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., had never seen security measures like those implemented for the Webb treason trial. Metal detectors, armed marshals, and bomb-sniffing dogs created multiple layers of protection around what had become the most significant intelligence scandal in American history. Elena sat in the witness protection area, no longer the homeless woman who had wandered Seattle's streets, but a figure whose testimony would reshape how the nation understood betrayal at the highest levels of government. 3 months had passed since Webb's arrest, and the investigation had uncovered a conspiracy far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. The deputy director's network of accomplices included not just CIA operatives, but individuals within the NSA, FBI, and even the Pentagon who had been systematically selling American secrets to foreign governments for over a decade. The financial trail revealed payments totaling nearly $50 million, distributed across dozens of offshore accounts and shell corporations, designed to hide the source of the funds. Elena's appearance before the Senate Intelligence Committee had been classified at the highest levels, but leaked details had already begun reshaping public understanding of how intelligence agencies operated. Her testimony revealed not just Webb-specific crimes, but systematic failures in oversight and accountability that had allowed the conspiracy to flourish for so long. Committee members struggled to comprehend how someone in Webb's position had been able to operate with such impunity while directly causing the deaths of American operatives. The courtroom drama unfolded with Elena as the star witness, her decade of careful documentation providing prosecutors with evidence that was both overwhelming and meticulously organized. Financial records showed the exact dates and amounts of payments Webb had received from foreign intelligence services. Communication intercepts revealed his direct contact with enemy operatives who had used his information to target American operations. Most damning were the operational records that proved Webb had deliberately structured missions to maximize casualties while maintaining plausible deniability. Webb's defense team attempted to portray Elena as an unstable former operative whose years of homelessness had compromised her mental capacity and reliability. They argued that her evidence had been fabricated during a decade of paranoid delusions, and that her accusations were the product of trauma-induced conspiracy theories rather than factual investigation. The strategy required them to simultaneously argue that Elena was too mentally compromised to be credible while somehow being sophisticated enough to forge years of classified documents and financial records. The prosecution's response was devastating in its thoroughness. Dr. Park's technical analysis had verified every piece of electronic evidence, using forensic techniques that could detect any signs of tampering or fabrication. Colonel Mitchell's military expertise provided context that explained the operational significance of Webb's betrayals. Most importantly, Elena's own testimony demonstrated a level of detailed knowledge and logical consistency that contradicted any suggestion of mental instability. Elena's time on the witness stand stretched across 5 days of intense questioning that revealed the full scope of her investigation and the personal cost of her 10-year mission. She described living in doorways and abandoned buildings while secretly monitoring Webb's activities, using skills learned during years of deep cover operations to maintain surveillance without being detected. Her testimony included specific dates, times, and locations that corroborated the evidence found on the memory device. The most emotionally charged moment came when Elena was asked to identify photographs of her fallen Phantom 7 teammates and describe their final moments. Her voice remained steady as she recounted watching each operative being executed after the Prague explosion, their deaths orchestrated by the very man who had sent them on the mission. The courtroom fell silent as she explained how she had been forced to remain hidden while her colleagues were murdered, knowing that revealing herself would only add to the body count without achieving justice. Webb's own testimony attempted to maintain his innocence while portraying Elena as a rogue operative who had fabricated evidence to support personal vendettas. He described his decades of loyal service, his role in protecting American interests around the world, and his shock at learning that someone he had believed dead was making such serious accusations. His performance was polished and convincing to those unfamiliar with the evidence, but prosecutors systematically dismantled his claims with documentation that proved his direct involvement in the conspiracy. The financial evidence proved particularly damaging to Webb's defense. Bank records showed regular deposits that corresponded exactly with dates when classified information had been compromised. Communication records revealed encrypted messages between Webb and known foreign intelligence operatives using codes that had been broken by NSA cryptographers. Most telling were travel records that showed Webb had made numerous trips to locations where he had met with his foreign contacts, often using false identities and cover stories about official business. Elena's network of homeless contacts became crucial witnesses as the trial progressed, their testimony revealing how she had maintained her investigation while living completely off the grid. Former military personnel who had fallen into homelessness described how Elena had approached them carefully over years, building trust and gathering information without ever revealing her true identity or mission. Their accounts painted a picture of someone who had sacrificed everything to pursue justice for her fallen teammates. Dr. Rodriguez testified about his initial encounter with Elena and his recognition of the Phantom 7 tattoo that had triggered the entire investigation. His medical credentials and lack of intelligence background made him a particularly credible witness, someone who had no personal investment in the outcome beyond his oath to help patients and his recognition that he had stumbled upon something significant. His testimony helped establish the chain of events that had led to Elena's exposure and Webb's eventual arrest. Agent Morrison's testimony revealed how the intelligence community had been systematically compromised by Webb's network, with ongoing operations being exposed to foreign governments who used the information to target American assets. His account of the meeting with Webb after Elena's survival became known demonstrated the deputy director's awareness of the threat she represented and his willingness to eliminate her to protect his conspiracy. Colonel Patterson appeared via secure video link to testify about the original Phantom 7 mission and the inconsistencies in official reports that had troubled him for years. His military expertise helped the jury understand the operational significance of Webb's betrayals and the impact they had on American intelligence capabilities. His testimony also revealed how the cover-up had been maintained through Webb's position of authority and his ability to control access to classified information. The international dimension of the conspiracy became clear as prosecutors presented evidence of Webb's contacts with intelligence services from hostile nations. Intercepted communications revealed how foreign operatives had used Webb's information to compromise American operations across multiple continents, resulting in the deaths of assets and the failure of critical missions. The scope of the betrayal extended far beyond the Phantom 7 incident to encompass years of systematic damage to American intelligence capabilities. Elena's description of her homeless years provided insight into a hidden world that most Americans never see, revealing how people who have been discarded by society often possess valuable skills and information that are ignored by official institutions. Her testimony about the network of veterans and former government employees living on the streets highlighted systemic failures in how the nation treats people who have served their country but fallen through the cracks of social support systems. The prosecution's closing arguments emphasized the unprecedented nature of Webb's betrayal, describing it as one of the most damaging acts of treason in American history. They highlighted Elena's extraordinary sacrifice and determination in gathering evidence while living in conditions that would have broken most people, maintaining her mission for a decade without any official support or recognition. Her story became a testament to individual courage and the power of truth to survive even the most determined efforts to suppress it. Webb's defense made a final attempt to discredit Elena's testimony, arguing that her years of homelessness had compromised her ability to distinguish between reality and paranoid fantasy. They suggested that her evidence had been contaminated by mental illness and that her accusations were the product of trauma rather than factual investigation. The strategy failed to address the overwhelming documentary evidence that supported every aspect of her claims. The jury's deliberation lasted only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges, including treason, espionage, conspiracy, and multiple counts of murder for his role in the deaths of the Phantom 7 operatives. The verdict represented not just Elena's personal vindication, but acknowledgement that the intelligence community's most trusted figures were capable of the most devastating betrayals. Webb's sentencing hearing would later result in life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Elena's testimony led to a broader investigation that exposed additional members of Webb's network and resulted in dozens of arrests across multiple agencies. The scandal triggered comprehensive reforms in intelligence oversight, with new protocols designed to prevent similar conspiracies from developing undetected. Elena's story became a case study in counterintelligence training, demonstrating how betrayal could be hidden within positions of trust and authority. The personal cost of Elena's mission became clear during victim impact statements, as she described the psychological toll of maintaining her cover identity while knowing that her teammates' deaths had been deliberately orchestrated. Her decade of homelessness had been a form of self-imposed exile, a punishment she had accepted as the price of gathering evidence that could expose the truth. Her sacrifice had preserved not just the memory of her fallen colleagues, but the integrity of the intelligence community itself. Dr. Rodriguez received official recognition for his role in triggering the investigation. Though he consistently credited Elena's courage and determination as the real source of justice for the Phantom 7, his medical perspective provided important context about how trauma and determination could coexist, challenging stereotypes about homeless individuals and their capabilities. His testimony helped establish that Elena's mental state had remained sharp and focused throughout her years of apparent displacement. Agent Morrison was promoted and assigned to lead a new counterintelligence unit specifically tasked with preventing similar betrayals within the intelligence community. His experience with the Webb case provided valuable insight into how trusted figures could exploit their positions to commit treason while maintaining facades of loyalty and competence. His testimony about Webb's behavior after learning of Elena's survival demonstrated the deputy director's consciousness of guilt and willingness to commit additional murders to protect his conspiracy. Colonel Patterson retired from active duty but continued working as a consultant on intelligence oversight, using lessons learned from the Phantom 7 case to develop new protocols for mission planning and operational security. His military expertise had been crucial in establishing the timeline of Webb's betrayals and demonstrating how the deputy director had systematically compromised American operations over many years. Colonel Mitchell received a commendation for her role in exposing the conspiracy, though she later testified that Elena deserved all credit for the investigation that had finally brought Webb to justice. Her position within the intelligence community had made her testimony particularly valuable, providing official validation for Elena's accusations from someone who had worked directly with Webb during the time of his crimes. The broader implications of Elena's story extended beyond the intelligence community to questions about how society treats its most vulnerable members. Her ability to maintain an extensive investigation while living as a homeless woman challenged assumptions about the capabilities and value of people who had been marginalized by economic and social systems. Her network of contacts among homeless veterans revealed an untapped resource of skills and knowledge that official institutions had ignored. Elena's transformation from Claire, the homeless woman, back to Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez became symbolic of how people could be reborn from circumstances that seemed hopeless. Her story resonated with audiences who had experienced their own forms of invisibility or dismissal, providing hope that truth could survive even when it seemed completely buried by powerful forces determined to suppress it. The memorial service for the 6 fallen members of Phantom 7 finally took place with full military honors, their sacrifices acknowledged and their deaths properly attributed to enemy action rather than operational accident. Elena spoke at the ceremony, describing each of her teammates and their final moments, ensuring that their memories would be preserved with accuracy and dignity. The service provided closure for families who had spent years questioning the official story of their loved ones' deaths. Elena's own future remained uncertain as she worked with federal authorities to identify additional members of Webb's network and assess the full scope of damage caused by 15 years of systematic betrayal. Her expertise in deep cover operations and her unique perspective on intelligence community vulnerabilities made her valuable as a consultant for reform efforts, though she struggled with transitioning from a decade of isolation to renewed engagement with official institutions. The warehouse district where Elena had conducted her investigation became the subject of federal preservation efforts, with authorities working to understand how she had managed to maintain such extensive surveillance capabilities while living completely off the grid. Her methods provided insight into alternative approaches to intelligence gathering that relied on human networks rather than technological systems that could be compromised or monitored. Webb's network of accomplices faced their own trials as prosecutors worked through the evidence Elena had gathered over her decade of investigation. The conspiracy had involved dozens of individuals across multiple agencies, each playing specific roles in facilitating the betrayal of American operations and the deaths of intelligence operatives. Elena's testimony would be crucial in establishing the connections between network members and their specific crimes. The international ramifications of Webb's betrayal continued to unfold as foreign intelligence services revealed how they had exploited the information he provided. American assets who had been compromised by Webb's intelligence leaks were identified and extracted where possible, though many had already been captured or killed as a direct result of his betrayals. The damage assessment would take years to complete and would reshape American intelligence operations worldwide. Elena's story became the subject of books, documentaries, and congressional hearings as the nation struggled to understand how such an extensive conspiracy had remained hidden for so long. Her testimony provided crucial insight into the psychological and operational aspects of maintaining deep cover identities, information that proved valuable for training future intelligence operatives and improving counterintelligence protocols. The tattoo that had triggered Elena's exposure became a symbol of how truth could survive even the most determined efforts to suppress it. The phoenix rising from flames proved prophetic, representing not just Elena's resurrection from official death, but the emergence of justice from the ashes of betrayal and conspiracy. Dr. Rodriguez kept a photograph of the tattoo in his office, a reminder of how recognizing hidden truths could change the course of history. Elena's final public appearance came during the congressional hearing on intelligence community reform, where she testified about systemic vulnerabilities that had allowed Webb's conspiracy to flourish undetected. Her recommendations focused on improving oversight mechanisms, enhancing background investigation procedures, and creating channels for reporting suspected misconduct that couldn't be suppressed by the subjects of investigation. The woman who had been officially dead for 10 years had not only survived, but had brought down one of the most damaging spy networks in American history. Her story demonstrated that justice could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, carried by someone who had sacrificed everything to preserve truth and honor the memory of fallen colleagues. Elena Vasquez had proven that sometimes the most invisible people possess the power to expose the most visible lies. The Phantom 7 Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery included a seventh grave marker, officially recognizing Elena's service and sacrifice, even though she had survived the mission that killed her teammates. The inscription acknowledged her decade of exile and investigation, honoring both her survival and her determination to seek justice for those who had been murdered by their own commander. Webb died in federal prison 3 years after his conviction, taking to his grave any remaining secrets about other conspirators or operations that had been compromised during his 15 years of treason. Elena attended his funeral as the only witness to ensure that justice had finally been served, though she felt no satisfaction in his death, only relief that the threat he represented had finally ended. Elena's integration back into society proved challenging after a decade of deliberate isolation and marginalization. Government programs provided housing and medical care, but adjusting to normal social interactions after years of maintaining elaborate cover identities required extensive counseling and support. Her story inspired new programs for helping intelligence operatives transition from deep cover assignments and addressing the psychological costs of extended deception. The homeless community that had unknowingly supported Elena's investigation received recognition and support through new veterans programs inspired by her story. Many of the individuals who had provided information or assistance during her decade of investigation were offered housing, medical care, and job training. Acknowledgement of their service to the nation, even though they had been unaware of their contribution to national security. Elena's legacy extended beyond the specific case of Webb's betrayal to broader questions about accountability, oversight, and the treatment of people who fall through society's cracks. Her story became a reminder that truth and justice could survive even when they seemed completely buried, carried by individuals who refused to abandon their mission despite overwhelming personal cost and sacrifice. The Congressional Medal Ceremony took place 5 years after Webb's trial, in a closed session attended only by the highest levels of government leadership and the families of the fallen Phantom 7 operatives. Elena stood before the assembled dignitaries wearing her dress uniform for the first time in 15 years, the fabric feeling foreign after so many years of deliberate invisibility. The Medal of Honor she was about to receive represented not just recognition of her individual sacrifice, but acknowledgement of a truth that had nearly been buried forever. President Katharine Williams spoke about Elena's extraordinary service to the nation, describing her decade-long investigation as one of the most remarkable acts of dedication in intelligence history. The president's words carried special weight, because she had been a junior senator during the original Phantom 7 mission, serving on the Intelligence Committee that had accepted Webb's false reports about the team's deaths. Her personal knowledge of how the conspiracy had deceived even congressional oversight made Elena's achievement more significant. Elena's acceptance speech was brief and focused entirely on her fallen teammates, reading their names aloud and describing their final acts of courage before Webb's betrayal led to their execution. She spoke about Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, who had shielded a wounded colleague with his own body during the Prague explosion. She remembered Captain Sarah Rodriguez, whose final radio transmission had been a warning to other American assets in the area. She honored Lieutenant David Park, whose technical expertise had been crucial to the mission, but who had died trying to destroy classified equipment before enemy forces could capture it. The families of the fallen operatives attended the ceremony, many meeting Elena for the first time despite her years of testimony and investigation. Marcus Chun's widow brought her teenage son, who had grown up believing his father had died in an operational accident rather than being murdered by his own commander. Sarah Rodriguez's parents had waited 15 years to learn the truth about their daughter's death, finding some measure of peace and finally understanding that she had died a hero rather than a victim of negligence. Elena's personal transformation. Over the 5 years since Webb's trial had been gradual and often painful. Transitioning from a decade of homelessness and isolation to public recognition and government, ceremonies required extensive psychological support and counseling. The skills that had enabled her to maintain her cover identity for so long made it difficult to form genuine relationships or trust official institutions, even those trying to help her rebuild her life. Dr. Rodriguez had maintained contact with Elena throughout her transition, serving as both friend and medical advisor as she dealt with the long-term effects of her years on the streets. His perspective as someone outside the intelligence community provided valuable grounding as Elena worked to separate her true identity from the various cover personas she had maintained. Their friendship represented one of the few relationships in her life that had originated during her time as Claire and survived her revelation as Elena. The reforms implemented as a result of Elena's investigation had fundamentally changed how intelligence agencies operated, with new oversight mechanisms designed to prevent the kind of systematic betrayal that Webb had orchestrated. The Elena Vasquez protocol required multiple independent verification channels for sensitive operations, ensuring that no single individual could compromise missions without detection. Intelligence operatives now received enhanced counterintelligence training focused on identifying potential betrayal from within their own organizations. Agent Morrison had become the public face of intelligence community reform, using his experience with the Webb case to advocate for greater transparency and accountability. His promotion to Deputy Director of the new Counterintelligence Security Office represented the agency's commitment to preventing similar conspiracies from developing. His testimony before congressional committees emphasized Elena's role in exposing systematic vulnerabilities that had existed for decades. Colonel Mitchell's military career had been transformed by her involvement in exposing Webb's conspiracy, leading to her appointment as the first Director of Military Intelligence Oversight. Her position required her to investigate potential security breaches and ensure that military intelligence operations maintained proper accountability and supervision. Her experience working directly with Webb during his years of betrayal provided valuable insight into how trusted figures could exploit their positions. The international intelligence community had implemented similar reforms based on lessons learned from Webb's network, with allied nations developing new protocols for sharing sensitive information and verifying the integrity of their liaison contacts. The damage assessment from Webb's 15 years of betrayal had revealed compromised operations across multiple continents, leading to enhanced security procedures and improved background investigation standards. Elena's work as a consultant for intelligence reform had taken her to agencies around the world, sharing her expertise in deep cover operations and her unique perspective on maintaining mission focus despite extreme personal hardship. Her training programs for intelligence operatives emphasized the psychological aspects of long-term deception and the importance of maintaining core identity while assuming cover personas. Her insights proved particularly valuable for preparing operatives for extended assignments in hostile environments. The Homeless Veterans Advocacy Program that emerged from Elena's story had provided housing and support services for thousands of former military personnel who had fallen through social safety nets. Elena's personal involvement in the program reflected her recognition that the network of forgotten veterans who had unknowingly assisted her investigation deserved acknowledgement and support. Many of the individuals who had provided information during her decade of investigation had been connected with medical care, job training, and permanent housing. Dr. Park's cybersecurity consulting firm had become a leading provider of intelligence community security services, using technical expertise gained during her NSA career and her analysis of Elena's evidence to develop new approaches to protecting classified information. Her work focused on creating systems that could detect internal threats while maintaining operational security, addressing the fundamental vulnerability that Webb had exploited through his position of trust. Thompson's investigative journalism had expanded beyond the Webb case to expose additional corruption within government agencies, using sources and methods inspired by Elena's approach to gathering information through unofficial networks. His Pulitzer Prize for exposing the conspiracy had established him as one of the most respected investigative reporters in Washington, with a reputation for uncovering truths that official investigations had missed. Elena's private life remained carefully guarded, with federal protection services maintaining surveillance to ensure that surviving members of Webb's network or foreign intelligence services could not target her for retaliation. Her transition from complete anonymity to public recognition had created new security challenges, as her visibility made her a potential target for groups seeking revenge for Webb's exposed operations. The psychological evaluation that had been part of Elena's transition back to society revealed the extraordinary mental resilience that had enabled her to maintain her investigation while living in conditions that would have broken most people. Her ability to compartmentalize different aspects of her identity while preserving her core mission focus became a subject of study for intelligence community psychologists developing improved selection and training criteria. Elena's relationship with her sister had been slowly rebuilt over the 5 years since her public revelation, though the gap created by her decade of apparent death and the necessity of maintaining her cover had left permanent scars. Her sister had grieved Elena's supposed death, attended memorial services, and built a life that didn't include the possibility of her siblings' return. Rebuilding family connections required careful navigation of emotions and expectations that had been shaped by years of false information. The financial settlement Elena received from the government for her years of unpaid service and sacrifice had been used primarily to support veterans programs and intelligence community reforms, rather than personal luxury. Her modest lifestyle reflected both her years of deliberate poverty and her recognition that material wealth could never compensate for the personal costs of her mission. The money provided her with security and independence, but couldn't restore the relationships and opportunities that had been lost during her decade of exile. Elena's testimony before the United Nations Security Council about international intelligence cooperation had established her as a recognized expert on counterintelligence and internal security threats. Her presentation about Webb's network and its international connections helped other nations identify potential vulnerabilities in their own intelligence services. The protocols developed based on her recommendations had been adopted by intelligence agencies across multiple continents. The scholarship program established in memory of the Phantom 7 operatives provided education opportunities for children of intelligence community personnel, recognizing the sacrifices made by families of those who served in classified roles. Elena's personal involvement in selecting recipients reflected her commitment to honoring her fallen teammates by supporting the next generation of Americans who might serve their country in similar capacities. Elena's speaking engagements at military academies and intelligence training centers focused on the ethical dimensions of intelligence work and the importance of maintaining moral clarity even when operating in ambiguous circumstances. Her message emphasized that the most dangerous threats to national security often came from within trusted institutions, requiring constant vigilance and commitment to principles that transcended personal loyalty or career advancement. The annual Phantom 7 Memorial Service had become an official ceremony recognizing all intelligence operatives who had died in service to their country, with Elena delivering remarks each year about the importance of remembering those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Her words consistently emphasized that the greatest honor for the fallen was ensuring that their deaths contributed to protecting others who served in similar roles. Elena's ongoing work with federal investigators had helped identify and prosecute additional members of Webb's network who had escaped initial detection, leading to dozens of additional arrests and convictions across multiple agencies. Her detailed knowledge of the conspiracy's operational methods and communication patterns provided law enforcement with tools for detecting similar networks that might be operating undetected within government institutions. The documentary film about Elena's story had won multiple awards and helped educate the public about the realities of intelligence work and the personal costs of serving in classified roles. Elena's cooperation with the filmmakers reflected her recognition that public understanding of intelligence community challenges was essential for maintaining democratic oversight and accountability. The film's success had generated additional support for veterans programs and intelligence community reforms. Elena's private moments of reflection often returned to the warehouse district where she had spent years conducting her investigation, now transformed into a memorial park, honoring homeless veterans and intelligence operatives who had served their country in unconventional ways. The small bronze plaque marking her former safe house bore a simple inscription acknowledging the truth that had emerged from years of patient investigation and unwavering determination. The legacy of Elena's investigation extended beyond the specific case of Webb's betrayal to fundamental questions about how democratic societies balance security requirements with accountability and oversight. Her story had become a case study in multiple academic disciplines, from intelligence studies to social work, demonstrating how individual courage could overcome institutional failures and expose truths that powerful forces had sought to suppress. Elena's final public statement on the 5th anniversary of Webb's conviction emphasized that her story was not unique, that there were likely other individuals within government and military institutions who were quietly working to expose corruption and protect national security despite personal risk and sacrifice. Her words served as both encouragement for potential whistleblowers and warning for those who might consider betraying the trust placed in them by their fellow citizens. The woman who had been officially dead for 10 years had not only survived and exposed one of the most damaging intelligence conspiracies in American history, but had transformed her personal ordeal into a catalyst for systemic reform and improved protection for those who served their country in the shadows. Elena Vasquez had proven that sometimes the most invisible people possessed the power to illuminate the darkest corners of government secrecy, ensuring that truth and justice could survive even the most determined efforts to bury them forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.